So now we're in the basic slider panel of Lightroom, and here we can make a whole bunch of adjustments. First off, we have treatment, whether we're doing color or black and white. We're working on color in this image. Below that, you could choose a profile and choose one of their presets. Go artistic number 2 there, and there is a slider to increase or decrease the effect. But we're here to learn how to edit photos from beginning to end, so we will not mess with that for now. Just know that it is there. Resetting the image. Below that, we have our white balance, which has a temp slider. You can go warm or cool. And we have a tint, which you can go magenta or green. They can be used for special effect or just to try and correct the white balance in the image. You also have an eyedropper here where you can pick something in the image that is supposed to be white, and it will auto white balance the image for you. I'm pretty happy with auto white balance from my camera for most things, so that is what we'll stick with. You can see I undid the auto white balance there, and it's pretty close to what we already had. Okay, so below that you can do some auto adjustments by just clicking auto, and it'll run some AI to just give you the best overall exposure and saturation. But like I said, we're going to do all this from scratch. I do have my shadow clipping on as well as my highlights. And I want to show you that some of these sliders, exposure, highlight, shadows, whites, and blacks, all refer to those points from our previous video. So if I move the exposure slider, you can see it's affecting our histogram up there. Can double click to reset any slider. Same with our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So this is just another way of affecting your exposure, just like we did in the histogram before. A little easier with the sliders. So for this image, we're going to lift our exposure a little. We're going to bump up our contrast a little as well. And what contrast does is it kind of darkens the darks and brightens the brights to give you a little pop. It also has the effect of adding a little saturation. So if that's not something you want, you'll have to watch that and fix it down here on the saturation slider. From here, we're going to dial back our highlights, retrieve some of that detail in the sky. I'm going to lift our shadows a hair, as well as our whites, just to the point of barely clipping. And I'm going to drop our blacks just till they barely start to crush. So as you can see, these sliders are kind of the same as the histogram. We could have done all that up here except for the contrast. And now we'll get into the present sliders. We have texture. Let me zoom in here. And that just kind of sharpens your edges and gives you a little more texture in the photo. You can go positive or negative, soften it up, give it that kind of dreamy look. Double click the reset. Then we have our clarity slider, probably the most overused slider in all of Lightroom. People think if you crank it up, it just really makes your picture pop. I think it makes a giant eyesore, but used with a soft hand, it does give a nice effect. And clarity is very similar to the contrast slider. Contrast affects more overall lights, darks, midtones, whereas the clarity is more just midtones. So it's darkening your darkest midtones and lightening your lightest midtones to give you some clarity. And now we have a dehaze slider, which is generally used on a hazy day to fix the haze back in the mountains. You can see how that works. If you take it too far, you really get some nasty colors. But with a light hand, it is a good effect. And a lot of woodland photography or something with fog, smoke, where you're looking for a nice glow, you can soften it up to get that effect as well. And another thing with the dehaze, if we came up here and we're working on a black and white, we can crank that up and really add some pop to our black and white imagery. Double click the reset, go back to color, and let's just make a few adjustments here. We're going to take our texture up just a hair, our clarity as well, and a little bit on the dehaze. And that also has the effect of adding a little saturation, which brings us to our next sliders. So here we have vibrance and saturation. And what the vibrant slider does, it boosts most of your warm colors, while to a lesser effect, the cooler colors, your greens and blues. But your reds, yellows, oranges, it affects those more. Whereas your saturation slider increases the saturation of all pixels pretty much equally. So this is saturation all the way up, and this is vibrance all the way up. And you can see the greens aren't nearly as vibrant when we crank the vibrance up as in the saturation. Something you could play with, lifting the vibrance so it really lifts the oranges in the trees, and drop the overall saturation and take a little bit of the green out. Just kind of make your fall colors pop a little more. And that is pretty much it for your basic sliders. Here we have a before and after.